to, yes, pressing, yep.
Okay. Can I just check with everybody that they're happy for the recording to happen? Yeah, okay, great. Oh, sorry, we have one more. Yeah, sorry. So the invitation was a very kind of hopefully reasonably simple one, which was I'm both a practitioner, but I'm also doing a part-time PhD, and my PhD research is kind of practice-based, and it relates to this topic of innovation. And I'm very involved, I'll explain a bit more, in the area of affordable housing. And I'm interested in processes of innovation within that space. But I think these kind of themes, actually, they relate to the whole of the community economies world. So, sorry, another to admit. Yeah, so hopefully it might be relevant to others. And I just wanted to then to read this quote, because I think this is the kind of starting point, hopefully, for the session. So there is this really interesting couple of sentences that Gibson-Graham wrote in their 1996 book on post-capitalism. And they write, unlike the proliferative fullness of the diverse economy, the community economy is an emptiness, as it has to be if the project of building it is to be political, experimental, open, and democratic. A community economy is an ethical and political space of decision, not a geographic or social commonality, and community is its outcome rather than a ground. And I've been really struck by this quote from Gibson-Graham, and I wanted to relate it to this topic of innovation, and then to find a way to find out whether there are others who are also interested in these kind of themes. So before we do that, I thought in some ways, this session is a space of emptiness, but that doesn't mean there is no one here. So I'll just stop sharing. So it'd be nice perhaps if we could just go round and just say, sorry, there's one more person. If we could just go round and just say who we are, maybe where we are in the world, maybe if there's an affiliation. It's just really interesting to see who's joined us. So I will start next to me. I have Marcus.
Yes, thank you, Tim. I'm Marcus. I'm a PhD student since 2020 in Leipzig, Germany. And for me, innovation is also a really interesting topic because I applied for my PhD position to a program where we actually want to analyze geographies of peripheral innovation. So I'm very much delving into this literature. But however, I also try to combine this geographies of peripheral innovation with diverse economies. So I'm as curious probably as you to see what this session will bring about. But although I work in Leipzig, I greet you from Berlin.
Okay, thank you very much. Next to you on my screen is Elisa.
Hi everyone, my name is Elisa. I'm from Brazil, and I'm just, really interested in this topic, and I was missing Tim as well, so that's why I'm here to just share a little bit of this space.
We know each other from, I used to work at a place called Schumacher College, and so we knew each other from there. Tom, you're next.
Hi everyone. Yeah, my name's Tom. I'm Irish originally, but I'm living in Arnhem at the minute in the Netherlands. But I work in the Czech Republic, so I'm sort of all over the place at the minute. So, but yeah, it's great to be here. to put faces to some names that I haven't met yet in a way. And yeah, I was really intrigued by the statement of the session. I can't say innovation is a term that I engage with too much, so I'll just be interested to see where discussion goes. But yeah, it's nice to meet everyone.
Great. Kalini?
Hi everyone, I'm Kalini. I'm from Brazil. I'm here because Tim's email also struck me with the subject and talking about Tim Ingold that I was very inspired during my dissertation, and somehow was related with Tim's work right now. And I'm really happy to be here and to hear more. And also, as Elisa, I'm really glad to see and listen to Tim again.
Christina.
Hi everyone. I'm based in Malta. I'm Maltese and I'm currently based in Malta. I'm an artist working directly for the communities, and in the past year my research and practice is looking towards community economies and diverse economies approach. I have recently joined the Community Economies Research Network. So this is, let's say, the first official event that I am following of the network. So I look very forward to the various discussions that I hopefully manage to follow, including this one.
Great, thank you, welcome. Ignacio, you're next on my screen.
Yes, I'm Ignacio Creel. I am in southern Chile, Mapuche territory. I am a practitioner participating in processes of precisely of a community-led innovation through co-design, indigenous-led innovation. And I was supposed to be here as a co-host for the system, but happens, Tim, that last night I read and was struck by chapter 1 of Post-Capitalist Politics by the same paragraph. So that's a sign I need to stay, and I will figure out how I get the other stuff done in the meanwhile or something. So thank you.
Great. Thank you for staying. Ana Heras, I don't know if that's how to pronounce it, but
yeah, either way is fine. Eras or Heras, if you want to say it in English.
Sorry.
No importa, está bien, perfecto. Soy de Buenos Aires, Argentina. Soy investigadora del CONICET. I'm a national researcher at the National Research System in Argentina. But if I need to define myself, I would like to say I'm an activist by nature. I was born an activist, so to speak. I'm a mother of 5 children, and we have 3 grandchildren as well, so we are a large family. And my topic of research is aprendizaje de la autogestión. How do we learn to self-manage is the word in English, though it doesn't quite translate. The work we do when we collectively take decisions and make decisions. I was struck by the description of your session. That's why I'm here, very interested as well. And also I linked it with the work of a Chinese artist and philosopher. His name is Cheng, François Cheng, actually. I can send you I'll write it in the chat so you don't have to waste your time. But I linked it to the way you were framing your session, because he speaks about vacío y plenitud in Spanish, which could be translated as emptiness and plenitude or fullness. So I did relate it right away. And so that's why I'm here. And I'm a talker and I have a lot to say because your ideas inspire me. So I'd better shut up. Gracias.
Thank you. Flavia.
Hello, everyone. I am here because I'm very inspired by Tim Crabtree's ideas. He used to be my supervisor at Schumacher College. And I am currently working with UNU's social business. So lots of the ideas that Tim share during my dissertation time. I am actually having the opportunity to help me in this project that I am developing. And I'm very glad to be here and to meet Tim again and Patricia and other friends that are here. And also because of Tim Ingold, he's also a huge inspiring also.
Great, thank you. Priscilla, you're next.
Hello, everyone. I'm also from Brazil, so there's like a massive contingent here. I'm happy. Saravá e para todo mundo. Well, I am in Philadelphia now. I'm an assistant professor in geography and Latinx and Caribbean studies at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. And so I've just been recently introduced in the network by Kevin St. Martin, who's a colleague. And my work has been, as it relates to community economies, it's been around Black feminist economic traditions in majority Black territories, particularly in the favela City of God in Rio de Janeiro. So just engaging with the multiple ways that knowledge is translated into invisible urban planning, invisible mediation economics, and yeah, and just kind of trying to understand how their actual communal praxis can inform the movements for abolition that we see growing around the world now. Yes, so it's such a pleasure to be here. It's my first also official, yes, in with the group. So thank you. Very excited.
Welcome. Fernanda.
Well, I got here a bit late, so I'm not 100% sure what I'm meant to do, but I suppose is to say I'm also Brazilian. At the moment, I just actually sold my participation in my social business, which I think Tim and some here don't know that I've done that. Kalini probably doesn't know that either, because these people know what I used to do then. So I'm in the space of void, Tim, and imagining where I should focus my creative energy next, in the context of also having moved to a smaller town in which I think maybe I could be more involved in local decisions and projects and situations. So yeah, I don't know where to go next, which is not so bad.
Thank you. Asimina, I don't know if you're able to share. Maybe not.
I think she wrote some.
Yeah.
Ah, sorry. What did she write in the? Oh, yes. So unfortunately cannot turn on cam and mic now. I'm based in Estonia and Greece, currently a PhD student and junior research fellow in Ragnar Nurk's Department of Innovation and Governance, contributing to a project called Cosmolocalism. Sorry and happy to be here. Welcome, Asimina. And the last person on my screen is Patricia.
Well, I have been a long-term colleague of Tim's, and I've been accompanying him through his PhD. So for me, it's really I'm very excited at what's coming out of the work that he's doing. And I particularly like this quote that he's begun with, that we need to think about working with community economies so that community is something that comes out of it, rather than something we can assume exists beforehand. I think that's such a creative way of looking at it. So that's what really drew me to want to come to the session.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Well, it's great to have such a diverse group of people. And I think it's really important to kind of start these just so we know who's actually here. I've got a presentation, and I'm going to try and get through it so that we have 20 minutes at the end that we can discuss. But I hope also I do have the contact details for people. So if anybody wants to make connections, I can also help to make those connections, because certainly my sort of incentive for offering this session was to see whether there were others who were interested in this area, and just to begin conversations. So this is only an hour, but hopefully for those who would like to, we could always carry on after. Okay, so just sharing my screen again. Okay, can I just check that everyone can see that?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So as I said, I'm interested to explore with others what it might mean to open spaces of emptiness in the community economy, and how this relates to processes of innovation. One of the things I was also struck by, I think when I was reading that early book, but maybe a later one, is that there was a reference by Gibson-Graham to a Buddhist author called Thich Nhat Hanh. And Thich Nhat Hanh writes extensively about emptiness, but his interpretation of emptiness is that it's not a nothingness, but actually relating it back to notions of self. It's this idea that we are always, we're never an isolated self, we're always in relation to others, to the environment, to non-human beings. And so that's his interpretation of emptiness. We're empty of a separate self, we're always in relation to others. So this notion of relationality is kind of how I'm interpreting that notion of spaces of emptiness. And this was the quote that I read before. So just a really quick background. I live in the south of England. I've worked in the south of England for a long time, nearly 30 years. Before that, I worked for a kind of economics think tank called the New Economics Foundation for 5 years. I studied economics, but I've always been interested in kind of the practical application at a local level of new economics. And so, for example, I was involved in a social enterprise that provides school meals to local primary schools. I'm involved in a social enterprise called Dorset Community Energy that raises funds to put photovoltaics on schools and hospitals. But now mostly I work between Wessex Community Assets and the rest of the time trying to finish my PhD. So that's a kind of very brief background. So I wanted in this session just to give 2 or 3 kind of short narratives that relate to this question of innovation, and hopefully also start to explore this question of what do we mean by operating within spaces of emptiness. So Wessex Community Assets, we've been going for about 20 years, and we support what are called community land trusts. So these are where you hold the land in a trust and then develop affordable housing on the basis of that, and it keeps things affordable in perpetuity because you're taking the land out of the market. So we've worked with about 25 completed schemes and another 50 odd communities across the southwest of England. And increasingly, as we sort of got involved in this work, I sort of developed a kind of disquiet. And this disquiet was that we were kind of starting to work in a rather formulaic way, where you're supposed to gather together a group, they find a site, they plan the development, they build it and they live it. So that's a very simplistic sort of representation of what happens. And then for the funding that we had to bring into these processes, we were always asked to write theories of change. And these theories of change got more and more complicated. And as they got more complicated, I got more senses of disquiet, really, that these theories of change didn't really represent what we were actually engaged in.
Sorry, can you go back to the other slide because it was so small? And
this one? Well,
yeah.
it's just an example of a complicated theory of change that
okay.
Actually I think is pretty worthless. It kind of pretends that we can kind of state a problem, we can state where we want to get to deal with that problem, and we can identify the steps that we're going to take to get from A to B. And this is what I want to kind of explore in this presentation, is that that's not how things really are in reality. So why do we pretend to funders or to ourselves that that's the way that, you know, innovation happens, for example? So this is what I was kind of had a disquiet about. So as we sort of developed, when we started, we supported quite a wide range of different types of community housing, like self-build or cooperatives or co-housing, but increasingly, and mainly because of funding, we started to focus down on creating partnerships between a community group and a large housing association. And to an extent, this worked in that it allowed the funding to come down. But in this country, in the UK, we talk about community-led housing. But it became increasingly clear that it was the housing associations, these big organizations, publicly funded, not democratic, that were actually leading the process. And during that sort of shift towards these partnerships with the housing associations, a lot of the early innovation that we were trying to develop got squeezed out. So, yeah, so this is sort of, this was kind of my first sort of disquiet, I guess. And in the abstract that I put up for the conference, I explained that I had this, I shared this concern that Tim Ingold and Deleuze and Guattari had raised about something they called hylomorphism. And I thought I should just put up a quote from Tim Ingold that kind of, I think, explains his and I think my sort of concern with this sort of approach. So he says, to create anything, Aristotle reasoned, you have to bring together form, morphe, and matter, hyle. In the subsequent history of Western thought, this hylomorphic model of creation became ever more deeply embedded, but it also became increasingly unbalanced. Form came to be seen as imposed by an agent with a particular design in mind, while matter, thus rendered passive and inert, became that which was imposed upon. My ultimate aim, writes Tim Ingold, with Deleuze and Guattari, is to overthrow the model itself and to replace it with an ontology that assigns primacy to the processes of formation as against their final products, and to the flows and transformations of materials as against states of matter. So going back to these partnerships between community land trusts and housing associations, it felt to me that we'd ended up with a model which then gets imposed on communities. It's not community-led and innovation is being squeezed out. So how do we start to kind of open up these spaces of innovation? This was the question that I had. So the next opportunity to sort of explore maybe a different approach was, we were asked by a council in the Southwest to work with an arts organization to run a workshop. And the workshop was around how do we involve the community in solutions to homelessness. In this town, there's particularly high rates of homelessness and lots of organizations involved. How could we bring those people together with others, maybe not involved in organizations, to see if we could come up with innovative responses? So it was a great, I sort of approached this with some excitement that we would be working with this arts organization and that this might lead to something. But in the end, they took an approach. It's a Joanna Macy approach. And they decided that the workshop should follow a very set format, which is there on the screen. I won't go into it, but what happened in the workshop was that as we went through the day and as people were guided through this process, people kept saying, but this isn't what I was coming for. I was coming to explore solutions, or we're coming as an organization that's got some property and we'd like to make it available, but there's no space within this workshop to bring these actual practical things. So although there were lots of artistic activities that took place according to this spiral, actually it felt like a lot of people, most people left the day kind of feeling frustrated that we hadn't actually come up with any sort of steps forward. So that was a bit disillusioning in a way, and kind of opened up this, this further question. Well, how do we try to explore these spaces of innovation in different ways that don't follow these preset sort of paths? So then soon after, we had a link through Schumacher College with a Brazilian NGO and called Ibiaca. And Ibiaca had been receiving funds from the British Council. And it's a bit strange, but one of the stipulations of the British Council for any Brazilian organization to receive funds was that they have to have somebody from the UK who goes as part of the project. And so I was invited to go to Sao Paulo, and it was under something called the DICE Fund. And I was actually invited because the British Council was proposing that during the week that I was there, and there were other people from other organizations that were invited, we were supposed to hold a series of meetings. And in these meetings, we were supposed to come up with a plan, a funding plan that we would then present to the British Council DICE Fund. I think it's Developing Innovative Community Enterprises or something. Anyway, it's one of these funds. And I felt very uncomfortable, being invited, to go to Brazil as a kind of consultant. And secondly, that we would be spending money just on a series of meetings that didn't seem to result in anything tangible other than funding applications. So instead of that, and working actually with Kalini and Flavia, who are on this call, we went back to the British Council and said, well, could we not use the money that you're making available to actually do something a bit more practical? And the NGO had been working with women in an area of Sao Paulo called Paralelos. And they had this proposal that they wanted to develop a women's carpentry cooperative. So the suggestion was that we could bring a female carpenter from Britain. If there had to be someone from Britain coming, why not an actual female carpenter who could work alongside the women from Paralelos? And so I sent this photograph of a bench that the carpenter, she's called Alice, had made. And the group came back and said, this is wonderful. We would like to make a bench, obviously not the same bench. We don't have that level of skill, but we would like to make a bench for our community center. So we then had to think, okay, how is this going to happen? So Alice came up with a sort of a simple plan, but we then had the challenge, where do we get the wood? And then somebody said, oh, actually, we know this place where there's this stock of recycled wood. Why don't we use that? And then somebody else said, well, there's a center in Paralelos where they actually have woodworking equipment. We could ask them whether we could do the workshop there. So that happened. So these various rather unexpected, random kind of connections were made. And this workshop happened. And a bench was made. And that then, well, we didn't actually get the British Council funding, but at least we had a good workshop. And what that started to make me sort of see, and this is sort of bringing it back to this thing about innovation and spaces of emptiness, is this notion of a confluence. So a confluence is where different rivers come together, so they flow together. And there's an interesting writer called Kenneth Gergen, and he gives this quote, which I think sort of illustrates, it's sort of an analogy to what I think emerged during this workshop in Brazil. So he says, he gives the analogy of baseball. So he says, what we traditionally view as independent elements, the person with the bat, the bags, the people in the field, are not truly independent. They are all mutually defining. Alone, they would all be virtually without meaning. It is when we bring all these elements into a mutually defining relationship that we can speak about playing baseball. Let us then speak of the baseball game as a confluence, a form of life in this case, that is constituted by an array of mutually defining entities. So I think for me, there's a parallel there between this notion of a confluence and Gibson-Graham talking about spaces of emptiness. If we see those spaces of emptiness actually as a sort of a focal point for flows and forces coming together. So just to finish then, I'll just talk very briefly about the work that I'm currently doing. So it's a project called Raise the Roof, and we're working with a range of partners and local people, and again around affordable housing. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to connect together local materials that come out of regenerative agriculture and forestry with local processing and manufacture, and then linking that to a sustainable and affordable housing. And it's a complicated project and I could spend hours on it, but just to sort of try and give you a sense of it. One thing that we've been doing is running practical sustainable construction courses. So these are tiny houses that are being built for a partner charity that works with rough sleepers, people who are homeless and are interested in this kind of accommodation. But it allowed us to start to build up connections with local carpenters, with local suppliers of timber, etc. And then in our area, we used to grow these crops called flax and hemp. So we've become very interested in how do you bring those materials back into cultivation? And then how could you bring those into construction? So what we're looking at is building these modular frames and then filling them with a mixture of hemp and clay or lime to make buildings. And we're also working with Plymouth University, and we've become interested in the whole area around digital design. And we're working with an interesting partners called Automated Architecture, who are going the whole way down the kind of automated robotic fabrication, which is not what we're interested in, but we're interested in the work that they do around engaging ordinary people in design processes. So these are my last couple of slides, so we have time to talk. So one of the ways that we've been thinking about the work we're doing is what are the elements that we have to put in place that is going to allow us to sort of weave together all of the different people and organizations within our locality. And so we talk about creating physical platforms, these kind of maker spaces, training platform, digital platform. But when seen in this way, I think this is this might be familiar to somebody interested in actor network theory, this notion of an assemblage, a kind of a network, and the things that you put in to allow that network to develop. But, and I'm sorry, this probably isn't very clear, but there's an interesting author called Erin Manning who draws a lot on Deleuze and Guattari. And she says, what have you thought about different concepts that you try to drop like a pebble or a bit of water into a pond, and the ripples kind of ripple out, they overlap, and then you kind of follow those flows, those ripples, to see what happens and what emerges from those different, almost like, yeah, well, let's call them pebbles into a pond. So one of the pebbles is, you know, use of local natural materials. So we're exploring different ways that we can throw that pebble in the pond. And then there's digital co-design. So we've started running workshops around digital co-design, or this issue about local fabrication. So we've started working with various people on this. Okay, how do we make a local fabrication facility? But these are not based at the moment on a very clear business plan or theory of change or a set of outputs and outcomes that we're anticipating achieving in the next 12 months. It's more creating this space and saying, right, what happens and how do we follow these flows, these kind of moves that might emerge from these propositions. So just a last slide to finish off. So Tim Ingold suggests that from an initial expression, a line begins to form. It extends out and starts to cross over other lines. A focus on life processes requires us to attend not to materiality as such, but to the fluxes and flows of materials. We are obliged, as Deleuze and Guattari say, to follow these flows, tracing the paths of form generation wherever they may lead. Movement along these paths is creative. The pathways or trajectories along which improvisatory practice unfolds are not connections, nor do they describe relations between one thing and another. They are rather lines along which things continually come into being. So that's my slides. I always do too many slides, so I'm sorry, but hopefully it sort of tries to give you a sense of how we're trying to move away from, yeah, this rather linear approach to working, to how do we take a more improvisatory approach to innovation. So anybody have any responses? Fernando.
No, I'm curious to, because I think I understand more or less what you're saying about what changed in your view of this process and what you more or less where you're trying to go with your own work. And at the same time, I'm wondering how that has affected the way you engage with other actors, because for instance, you mentioned this gathering where you had this structure from Joanna Macy, and it was one thing, and then people wanted something else, right? And I wonder, whilst you're trying to work in this different way, maybe, but you're also engaging people that are not necessarily reading Tim Ingold or trying to work in that different way. What do you do then? Because I'll give my own example. I think it's always a good way maybe to start. I'm now living in this gated community with about 400 houses. It's like full of nature and stuff, but and I'm thinking, oh, I want to bring people together to talk about what we do with nature and compost and all these things. And I think my dad says, you can't approach, there's a managing group, like a board that, you know, currently runs the place. You can't just say that. You have to come up with a plan, explain how much money would be needed to compost everything for the whole site, you know, like what land you're going to use, because it's not simple, you know, with suppliers, and you have to show up in front of them with something that, you know, proves that it's feasible and how you want to, like with a proposal, you know. I'm like, okay, but I don't know if I want to come up with a proposal. I just want to bring people together, and maybe composting is not even what people are interested on, even though they should be, but maybe they're not. And then it's a bit, yeah, it's just like this thing, like you want to do it differently, but maybe the world or like some players in your field of work do not. So it's, and then it's like, do you still do it, even though, like you said, that, you know, that structure of change and things, you think it's now maybe slightly futile. I don't know if that's the word you use, but it doesn't feel quite right to you anymore, but it does feel right to a lot of people maybe. So do you, like, kind of strategically, do you still do that to get people on board and get the money and get stuff, hoping that then in between the lines, when you meet them and you're in dialogue, you start doing things? But that's a hope, isn't it? And then, like you said, with the housing association, you can get kind of like run over by this processes and tools and things that should be this way or another. The same at work, like I'm trying to promote, I'm now working with ESG in a school setting, and I have to get all the other directors on board, you know, like they have to believe this thing, and we are proposing workshops to them, and it's the same. It has to be a very structured workshop where, you know, I can't just like, guys, you know, let's like start having conversations of what makes sense in your own area of work. They're going to be like, what is this girl doing here? You know, like, I don't have time for this. So it has to be a consultant that comes in, because the consultant has more validity than me. And then the consultant, if it's not expensive, they don't trust it. And if it's not like structured with a process that they can see the outcome already, it doesn't work. And then I'm like, so the question is, you know, do you still do it then? Because that's what these people you're engaging with are ready to explore. You know, they will allow me to explore these issues if there is this format. And then, of course, your own energy is a bit like, maybe. You don't do it because in the end, you think this is going to waste a lot of money and time and we're not going to get anywhere. But you can't be sure that you're not going to get anywhere. You don't know. But you have a hunch because you've done it before. Anyway, it's like,
okay. Yeah.
I'm talking for a long time, but it's just to know from you, ever since you've like realized these things and started thinking and working differently, how are you doing that with other people?
Yes, very good question. So shall we take a few other comments or questions and then sort of see, because I kind of feel that there may be sort of related ones or there might be different ones as well. Because my simple answer would be, yeah, of course, you know, you have to write funding bids and you have to sometimes play those kind of games, but there's a real danger in then losing sight of what it is you're really trying to do. But anyway, that I can give a longer answer. Are there any other questions or comments? And welcome, Jakob. Just join us.
Yes,
Priscilla,
I would.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm still trying to elaborate exactly. But so I'm just gonna speak of the sensation. I feel kind of an agitation with the word emptiness or innovation upon the empty. It brings me back the kind of the heritage and the idea of like the Americas is the empty space to be brought innovation to, or modernity to, or development to, or science to. So it's a word that I love because I think it's very pregnant in a way that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about it. There is no empty space because it's fullness of interconnectedness across and around and through. So I just want to kind of give that feedback because it really agitates my heart to hear, let's think of openness to emptiness, So I think that's one, there's a little tension there. I think the other thing is I am constantly interested in the questions of how can we think of community? Okay, so the other point is community as a result, as opposed to community as the foundation. It's interesting to me, living in the US, initially I didn't quite understand the idea of intentional communities. It felt like it was really important and necessary, but it also felt like what was to be worked through was not necessarily in a specific project, say a housing project or a composting project or whatever it is, but it was actually the work of, the innovation was trust itself, if I guess is what I'm trying to say, sort of the lack of experience of trust, deep trust through conflict and everything, it seemed to me like what would be innovative at the end would have been building trust itself, because it just felt unknown or unexperienced. So I think that the issue of consensus that someone mentioned about it is sometimes we're building community economies or building radical democracy is so complicated because it takes so much time and it runs up against funders and deadlines and whatnot. But when the trust has been the work itself, I've seen consensus be achieved in 2 minutes. So it can take 2 days or 2 minutes, or you know what I mean, or never come because the focus is a deliberation, not the building process of trust. I think these were things, and then I think a third point that I feel I always try to understand is somebody, I think it was Fernando, that mentioned if they bring the consultant, then we'll listen to them. And if it's too expensive, it's not going to be listened to. If it's too cheap, it's not going to be listened to. So I think how can these different hierarchies of knowledge around expertise, how can that be the actual work of reversing, kind of these hierarchies, redistributing resources, power, and ideas in a way that it's felt like commons building, so that the issue of consensus doesn't become this frightening, time-consuming, threatening to funders type of thing. Yeah, I think these were just kind of some things that came to mind.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Anyone else would like to?
Can I?
Yes, Ignacio.
just want to relate from my experience, several years working with in co-design processes with indigenous communities in Chile. Well, actually I can relate to all as well with comments of Priscilla and Fernanda, but I just want to say that that I think is important, this rethinking of these so-called development processes that you are doing, and what and design processes, because in the for us in the field, it's been a real challenge to, you know, have this sort of expectations of, you know, linear development in one hand, which sometimes are internalized by the teams working in the field, and in the other hand, you have this dynamic of, you know, expansive waves and interlinking results, let's say, of these drops, right? That a collective might, you know, be able to pour, and so things just don't happen in a linear way. But in the contrary, you know, the more important stuff happens in a somehow in an unexpected and untimely way, if you like. So way later on the road that it was expected, you know, in the deadlines. So this, I think, is hard in terms of the funding issue and whatever, but it also becomes a difficult issue in a more human level, when, you know, you are sort of internalizing that your professionalism has to do also with being able basically to control some of these processes, right? Because that's basically, and you cannot control, and we shouldn't be trying to control any of these innovation, is, you know, community-led innovation processes. So yeah, I think that's my take. I don't want to take any more time, but
thank you. Any other quick? Patricia, did you? No,
no, sorry, I'm too expressive. It's like I'm just so interested in what people are saying, but I'm listening.
Hi, Jakob.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm on my phone because I'm in the garden, so I'm not sure how this works.
Well, welcome anyway. We were just, I gave a sort of presentation and then we were just having some responses to it. I'm going back to Fernanda's question. I mean, I think it is an interesting, you know, I think there is a danger, I suppose, in just sort of saying, you know, you never need to plan, and you know, you can do everything through improvisation and all of that. And I think probably it's more about how do you try and navigate this kind of terrain, which tries to force you into these kind of linear, you know, pre-planned sort of set ways of doing things. How do you maintain that openness? So for example, you know, I'm funded currently a couple of days a week by a foundation. And when we put the application in, we made sure that what we were proposing to do was focus much more on the process of developing, you know, I mean, we said we're going to be developing a business plan for a makerspace. We're going to be developing a business plan for working with farmers growing hemp. We're going to be developing, but the funding was for the, you know, for the process, not for the outcomes. We were really clear in the application. There were no outputs that we promised. The only outputs were what we called a business plan, but that's for us to define what that looks like. So, you know, in a way that's kind of playing the game, but it's, Yeah, I think also, some things are more straightforward than others. So, for example, with the work we do around community energy, we've raised funding to put photovoltaics on roofs, but that does entail, writing a business plan and writing a community share offer and having, power purchase agreements with schools and hospitals or whatever. So that's all kind of there isn't much scope for innovation. So you kind of just, you do what's needed to make that happen. But in this other area where we're working, how do you link affordable housing with the use of natural materials and make sure that the processing and manufacture happens locally? Well, there are no models that we can look at. There's very little of that is actually happening. So it's a real space of, I take this point about a space of emptiness, but I mean, it's a space of openness, let's say, where we're trying to bring together a whole kind of set of actors that don't normally relate to each other. And so that feels very different. So I guess there's also a question about, judgments about what is the circumstance that you find yourself in and what are the projects you need to develop. Going back to Priscilla's, your point, I think you're really right. This, that word emptiness, there are different takes on it. And if we promote that word, but people take it the wrong way, it can be very, as you say, it could be quite dangerous. I mean, I think that within this community economies community, I'm very struck by the suggestion that we should always kind of take inventories of who's there and what assets do we have, so that we are very kind of aware of who's in this space or what's in this space and what are those existing relationships, so that although we can call it a space of emptiness, we're very clear that it's an emptiness that is also full of lots of different relationships and forces and stuff. So, but I definitely take your point that we have to be careful of that one. And yeah, any other comments or experiences that people have to share in this kind of space? And
I wanted to make a comment on a different area, but your presentation got me thinking about this, which is the area of teaching at the university. I teach at the university, and I'm going to bring the example of an undergraduate course I'm teaching now, for which, of course, I have to plan and I have to stick to the plan. And there's the curriculum that I have to respond to, which I take it to be the right of the students. I have that frame in mind. I have the frame in mind that, of course, I am there to fulfill a responsibility in that sense, right? But in my planning, in my what we call here programas, the syllabus, what I write in there is that every week there is an assembly. I have a 4-hour slot to teach. So I sort of divide up the time in slots. The first class, I take it to explain my framework. And then the rest of the meetings, we decide as an assembly with the students in which way we want to divide up the time. So from the first class, they are invited to explore trust, as Priscilla was saying, as a mode of teaching and learning. So what that means is that, do I have a plan? Yes, I do. Do I have a commitment to the right of the students to be fulfilled? Yes, I do have one. Can I share the decision-making process in ways that would make more meaning to all of us being there? Yes, I can. that brings up also a lot of tension in the students, because usually, at least in Argentina, they are very schooled into either doing the work or pretending they're doing the work. And what I'm trying to propose is that there's a big space to decide upon, to make decisions upon together. I could speak for a very long time about this, but I just wanted to bring that up because to me, this is an example where the sort of emptiness you're talking about, which I don't take it in the way Priscilla took it, though I understand what you said and I appreciate your comment for that matter. But I think it's emptiness in the sense of here is something that is pregnant, as we use the word, of possibilities. And there are many ways in which this can be put to visibility for us to explore. And so I wanted to provide, I do have very many other examples of my community work and my research work, but again, I would be speaking forever, which is not the right thing to do. Gracias, muy interesante.
I think I was lucky when I taught that I tried to revolve the work around project-based learning. And what was interesting there was not so much the particular project that the students were working on, but that after a certain point, things didn't go according to plan, or there would be issues of trust within the group. And it was those things that we could then explore together. And I think it's very hard in contexts where you're just expected just to deliver a syllabus, you know, and equally, you know, project-based learning is not always accepted as a legitimate way to teach. But I think that the more we can root learning in actual real experience, the better, I think. So yeah, but I'm very interested in your assemblies. It sounds interesting.
Can I?
Patricia, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say that I just found the conversation so helpful in distinguishing, just going back to the quote that you gave us at the beginning, like to the importance of emphasizing that it's an emptiness of ready-made structures that you're talking about. But on the contrary, that it's full of existing relationships that have potential new connections and new meanings possible there. And I think it's very interesting, Tim, that right at the beginning of your work in this PhD, you were interested in trying to flesh out a different kind of expertise. And I feel that what's being discussed here is what kind of expertise is required to make these judgments about where the issue is planning because you've got a certain responsibility or a recognition of a right to provide or an expectation to fulfill, like you were speaking of, Anna, and the difference between that and the expertise that you talked about, the emptiness being a space of political, ethical decision-making. And that's the fundamental expertise that leads to the generation of a commons and community. And I love what Priscilla said about maybe the most radical project is the one of building trust, out of which everything else depends. So I found the conversation really thought-provoking.
I just wanted to clarify something, which is in Argentina, university is free. And when I said students have the right, I did not mean it by any means to mean what's okay.
I think I understood you to mean that you took seriously that they have a right to expect to learn or to have something they're hoping to, in that sense.
Yeah, sorry, it's just that sometimes I interact with people whose frame is different, and when I say things like that, they take it differently. So I just felt that I had to clarify that. Gracias.
I'm conscious that the session was only scheduled for an hour, and I don't want to force anybody to stay on, but I'm happy to stay on. So if anybody needs to leave, please. It was lovely to see you, but if anybody has any other things they want to say or questions or comments, that would be great also. Well, it sounds like people do have to leave. So, but thank you very much for joining. And I always sort of feel slightly uncomfortable with these sessions because I kind of feel I'm sort of, you know, I used it sort of to try to clarify or focus my thoughts. So I'm sorry if it wasn't so useful for me.
I need to say something about that because I'm on the organizing committee of the Congreso, and I think it's very important that sessions like these happen because that was actually in the call, you know, the call was open to deciding what the space and time would be proposed for. And so you proposed it, and I don't think we should apologize for something like that.
Right.
I feel very responsible about my role in that. Perdón. Bueno, me tengo que ir. I really have to go, pero gracias.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. And I have the list of people that joined. So I will just send out. Some people asked for some references, so I'm happy to send those around if those are helpful. And I hope to see people on future CERN calls.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Tim, and thank you for sending round the list to know who's been in this conversation together. That would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Bye
Nice to
bye.
meet you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
I guess I should stop recording.